For joining us for our second live Q&A webcast today. Our first one was a couple of weeks ago, and we got a very large response from it, a lot of positive feedback. So we're excited to do those again. As I mentioned last time, there's no manual for responding to global pandemic, both the technical and the economic challenges of that. And so the whole purpose of these series of webcasts here is to, really have a live Q&A, get questions from the MSP community, and provide as much shared information as we can to all help each other and really, tackle the technical and economic challenges that our customers are having together. Before I get started, though, I do want to point out there's a questions feature in the GoToWebinar. We would encourage you to actually submit your questions as we go along here. Time permitting, I'm definitely going to get to them and read them to our guests. So please feel free to use that. We may run out of time before we can get to yours, and if so, we will absolutely circle back to it. Without really further ado, let's get to our panelists on today's webcast. So first, I'd like to introduce Don Baham from Kraft Technology Group. He's the president of Kraft out in Nashville. Hey, Don, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me again. Appreciate it, Eric.
You bet, you bet. And our other panelist this time is Caron Griffin, who's Chief Technology Officer here at StratoZen. Hey, Karn, I guess you're enjoying beautiful Anaheim, right?
Yes, nice and warm today.
Yeah. So I should point out to the audience that, some of the potential guests that we've reached out to do these webinars have been really nervous about being on camera. They're all concerned about looking a little shaggy since they haven't been able to get a haircut in a few weeks. But that's the nice thing about the three of us. None of us have to worry about that today. So we'll keep with the short hair and balding for panelists for a while until people can get back into their barber. So let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Don, kind of the first question I had just for today is it's been about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks or so since we did the last one. What changes are you seeing in the customer base, now that we're a couple more weeks into this sort of lockdown situation?
Yeah, hasn't been really any big changes. I think that now what we're seeing, or what we have seen over the last couple of weeks, is things have stabilized, right? There was a big rush to get people working from home, get the right equipment, get the right access, have questions answered, start to get into a new routine. Even for our team, that was a new routine. For clients, it was a new routine. How do you make sure that you're engaging your workforce and making sure that you continue business operations? That has stabilized, and now people have kind of settled into, this is the new normal. This is how I have to operate on a day-to-day basis, and we're starting to see that reflected in the types of requests that have come in, and kind of what's going on with our clients is folks are settling in and embracing the new normal as best they can, and continuing to try to move forward.
Great. So it sounds like things aren't getting worse necessarily. They're getting back to, how do we operate the business now in this environment?
Correct. Absolutely.
Great. What about user support? It seems to me that, as this sort of drags on, and like you said, the first week or two, it's just getting people working from home and getting all that set up. But I'm curious on how user support's changed over the last few weeks as this has gone further. Have you had a lot of user support issues or requests or things that you've had to respond to?
I would say in general that has slowed down a little bit. At least that's been our experience. Again, I think as people have kind of figured out what their day-to-day routine looks like and how to get access to the right systems, we've stabilized some of that remote access, or we've set it up and then stabilized remote access for some of our clients that just didn't have it before because there wasn't a need. That communication has got a little better from leadership inside those companies, and this is our expectation. These are our expectations. This is how you do your job now. Those user requests have slowed down. So that's on one side. I would say On the other side, as people have become used to this is how I'm going to operate, less of a crisis mode and more of a, okay, now that we're past that initial crisis, what are the projects or initiatives or things that we were working on, or at least had on the roadmap to work on, that maybe we can start to have those conversations again. So we're starting to have those conversations with clients about maybe small projects or other initiatives that were put on the shelf for a couple weeks. Those conversations are starting to reemerge, and that may lead to other user support concerns. But trying to navigate now, how do we move into some of those projects or other initiatives that that we kind of put on the shelf for a little while.
Well, that's great news. I'm pleasantly surprised to hear that. I've kind of assumed that everybody would keep projects on hold, but that's good that things are getting back to a little bit of normal and
A little bit, yeah.
like
I mean, I would say larger projects are probably, we're still pushing those down. Obviously, anything that's going to involve major on-site support, we have still kind of pushed those further down the road. But it's those smaller things that we're starting to talk about again.
Yeah, great. So Karn, I'd like to kind of throw a question over to you now that we've gotten a lot in the last couple of weeks. I know a lot of MSPs have been, implementing the work from home technology and strategy and that really, a couple of weeks ago, right? And so, kind of as Don was talking about, that's sort of been in place at this point. But it seems like now that we're past the transition of just getting people up and running, you get into the point of, okay, there's, everybody's working now. What else should the MSPs start considering, right? As this thing is going to be extended for a few more weeks. So, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, we're still seeing kind of a considerable amount of high level incidents and things like that in our records and metrics, but I haven't seen it continue to increase. We had a big jump when the remote workforce kind of got into place, and we're still seeing those types of incidents. So we're seeing, remote login from privileged devices. We're still seeing intrusion prevention triggers inbound, and we're seeing a lot more on kind of like VPN type stuff and RDP, a lot of port scanning going on there. So, I think we keep kind of circling back to and returning to this, security hygiene, right? What are the kind of basic things that we have to do to protect the endpoint, to protect these now sometimes services that are used more. So like we're now doing VPN more. We're now in some cases doing RDP still, now those become targets. So we've seen increased port scanning on VPN, a lot easier to bring down a VPN with denial of service and things like that. RDP, of course, has had its problems in this last year with major security vulnerabilities, but we're still seeing some end clients using that. And so we're seeing some increased activity there. And we're also seeing a lot of increased activity on spear phishing. We're seeing a ton of, I just received one yesterday from one that looked like Audible, and it said, I'm gonna incur a $15 fee. It said your free trial has ended. And Audible gave these free trials, and it's now your free trial has ended. We're charging your credit card $15. Click here and it wasn't auditable at all, but it was very credible threat. So we're seeing a lot of increase in this kind of easy scamming going on and as well. So all of those, I think it's time for to look now. Let's check our email records again. Let's check our SPF records and DKIM and Demark if you have it. Let's check the firewall for denial of service throttling. That can be a problem. And also we've seen some capacity problems on VPN, and as well as people hadn't planned for it, so they've had to go out and get additional licenses or additional concurrent users, those type of things.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the incidents because, you know, in our last one webcast, we had Chris on and he went through, you know, the big spike in high severity incidents when we showed that chart and that. And so, you know, it is good news, I guess, that we're seeing it, you know, it's staying high, but it sounds like it's leveling out, right? It's not continuing to increase.
Yes, it's we would call it elevated at this point, but it's not escalating. So.
Right. So that's good. So like you said, I mean, now it's time to kind of go back and really batten down the hatches, so to speak, right? And lock down email, lock down firewalls, and further secure the endpoints. It sounds like since we're not, um, the MSPs are not having to respond to ever escalating threats. At least it's elevated and staying consistent there.
Yeah.
And Don, does that kind of echo with what you're seeing then? It sounds like that you're not having to you're not responding to escalated threats or continually escalating threats, but really, you know, like you said, working on smaller projects and then going back through and sort of locking down everything or making sure it's locked down.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And Karn mentioned something that we've been working on recently as well with some clients around Demark, and that's been a good focus for us. We went through that process not too long ago and on getting to P equals reject, but that's one of those smaller type of projects. Again, depending on the size of the company, it may be smaller, maybe a large project. But those are the kind of things that we're starting to have conversations about with clients is, okay, what can we do now that we've quote unquote normalized that maybe security initiatives or others that we can now kind of get the ball rolling again.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good tip from both of you guys, and that you know, those on the audience today, and that to implement extra protection mechanisms that they may have been putting off, like Demark, is a fantastic project to be working on right now. So I'd certainly think that's a good recommendation coming out of this. So I'm seeing, you know, more questions come in, and so as kind of like last time along the financial side. So Don, switching gears to the financial side of things, we've gotten several questions today as well as leading up to this webcast about, you know, how are you responding to the financial concerns of customers? And I think, you know, I'd like to put a little bit finer point on it in specifically, I'm hearing a lot of questions about, you know, when a customer's having financial issues, are you looking to pause services, or are you looking to, you know, maybe reduce the pricing in the short term? So they're keeping it at you know, maybe at cost or something like that, rather than actually just hitting the pause button.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. It's very applicable to our local market, obviously, and as well as nationwide and the global pandemic happening. But for us, specifically in Nashville, we were hit by a tornado in early March, and then shortly following, you know, the COVID crisis that continues. So our local economy has been hit pretty hard, and thankfully for us and for our client base, there has not been a big financial impact yet that we've experienced, and so hopefully that continues. But to that end, we have had a few clients that have approached us with asking for some options. And what I would say about pausing services, it's not something we've done, nor would I necessarily recommend it, especially on the security side, right? I mean, if you're pausing security related services, that just leaves your business open for all kinds of nefarious activity to go on without you being, you know, the wiser. For the client, the handful of clients that have come to us asking for solutions, you know, we're looking at things like extending payment terms, reducing some services because of a reduction in staff, and that kind of goes beyond just security services, but help desk, other services. If they've had to reduce staff because of either the tornado or COVID, okay, can we mid-contract, you know, contract our agreement with the client, and we're willing to do that. Especially, you know, with the intention that they'll be able to grow again once the economy reopens. The other option we've explored is extending contracts and deferring payments. So we may pause billing, continue the services, and then just extend the agreement and kind of make up for that on the back end of the contract. So those are the approaches that we are taking right now with a couple of requests, but I certainly wouldn't recommend pausing services, and I hope we don't have to get to that point, especially on the security side. So that's how we're able to handle it today. So yeah, I'd be interested in hearing, Eric, from your perspective. I know we're not one of those, but have you had other clients ask about maybe pausing security services, or had their clients ask about pausing security services?
Yeah, we haven't had a lot, but we haven't had nearly the number that I expected, actually, which is good. I mean, I think a lot of MSPs are in a very similar situation. At least a lot of our MSPs are in a very similar situation to you, Don, in that, things were kind of crazy there for a few weeks, but at least, for most of the client base, it's stabilized. We have had that request, though, from a few to actually pause services, and that's our concern as well, right? It's one thing to pause cybersecurity services just to save a little bit of money. It's another thing to actually pause the network, and I think that's the conversation we've been having with partners is, if you're pausing services because you've sent the whole workforce home and no one's using the corporate network, that actually doesn't sound crazy, right? But the key there is shut the thing down. If you're not really going to use the corporate network, at least lock it down to the point where you're pausing the whole network, not just pausing the cybersecurity services. Because we feel the same way. Sort of the worst case scenario is an MSP, out of trying to help, they say we're going to pause services for a couple of months, and then your customer gets breached while you're not really guarding the doors, so to speak. And so not only are you doing a disservice as the service provider, but really to the customer as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I would. It's interesting, and I hadn't thought necessarily that you would see that much activity. But I think there's a different approach that an MSP can take to, and we haven't. You mentioned one alternative. We haven't done this yet, but that is something to consider. Is maybe just reducing the cost in general. Passing it on at cost versus having a markup. You don't necessarily want to put it in those words to the client because they can see your margin there, but that could be an option as well for other MSPs that are thinking about what to do in this situation.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we've been looking at as well, and not literally saying this is our cost, like you said, but because a lot of our service providers, their customers are in a regulated industry like healthcare or financial or name one, right? And so that's the other concern we have, is that stopping services or pausing them suddenly has a couple month gap in your compliance reporting. And so what we've been coming back to for the few partners that asked is exactly that. Let's look at reducing the pricing in the short term, maybe adding on a couple of months at the end of your term to make up for it, but don't pause services from the security side, but certainly not from the compliance side as well, which needs to be a big concern.
Got it. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think with that compliance picture, having a huge gap in your security logs is going to be an issue. If you suddenly, I understand they're going to be maybe some leeway for, hey, yes, this was the time of COVID, but the very next question is, well, let me see the business continuity plan. Right? Like, if you had to shut down everything and there's this huge gap, well, how did that work? What was your plan? How was that enacted, and so forth? So it's going to lead them right to another, compliance framework.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you use COVID as the excuse for missing logs, you've just triggered a business continuity discussion with the examiner or the auditor, right? I hadn't thought about that at all. Yeah, that's good. Well, Karn, any kind of final thoughts here? I've gone through the couple of financial questions that we got and don't have a whole lot more. So we ran long last time, so we can run a little short if we need to, but I'd certainly like to get your final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, what this is, for companies like ours where we're kind of used to maybe having employees work remote occasionally or even have a remote workforce, this is, probably easier for us to get to. For some of the clients of our partners, this has been a complete, shakeup. And, I would just kind of really narrow down and focus on the really important pieces of security hygiene. The office is no longer, the firewall in some cases is no longer, everybody's at home, right? So the endpoint becomes super critical. Did everyone get a shiny brand new laptop with full security suite on it? Probably not, So, how secure are those home devices? Do we have some good advanced threat protection on it? If they're using VPN, people jumped on VPN Monday morning after an announcement over the weekend. Are those VPN servers patched or those concentrators patched? I mean, we had major patch problems with every vendor this year, with Cisco, Fortinet, Palo Alto. They all had severe VPN vulnerabilities. Have we patched those concentrators? The policy, work from home policies, I think, for many of these companies, they never had any intention for ever working from home. So are there policies in place for, appropriate use of software, confidential data, all those kind of things? And lastly, I want to give a little trick that I heard a partner do this week, is that they actually told all of their employees that they are doing a phishing test this week. And they had no phishing test in place, but they didn't have a phishing test in place and they didn't have the ability to do it, but they actually told their employees to look out for some suspicious emails, and you don't want to get caught because we're going through a test. But they hadn't yet put the test in place, but it actually improves some compliance on their part.
Wow. That's a fantastic recommendation, right? Every MSP should be saying we're doing a random phishing test every week for the next, 6 weeks, just to keep everybody on. That's awesome. So Don, I want to get your final thoughts too, but one question that I had from the last meeting was sort of the supply chain issues that you had mentioned that it kind of brought up out of the blue, and I was just curious, has that changed for the better or worse in the last couple of weeks?
Same, it's terrible. I mean, it's just, even I'll give an example. I went to order just one monitor. We did a small project that we finished up and realized didn't realize it. One of the employees at the client saw all the brand new monitors people were getting, and we told them to order a monitor for this employee, but they didn't listen. So sure enough, I want one of those brand new 24 whatever size monitors we got.
That's important right now.
Right. Okay, no problem. I mean, it's 45 days out for just to get a monitor delivered from Dell right now. So this particular size anyway. But yeah, I would say, unfortunately, at least what we're seeing, supply chain issues are still in place. And I would imagine as the economies around the world start to reopen and wherever these pieces are being manufactured, we'll start to see that improve over the next 60 days. But so as of right now, we're still seeing a crunch.
Wow. I really thought it would normalize by now, but yeah, that's good to know. So sorry to throw that one in there, but I was curious about it and I had forgotten to mention it earlier. But
Sure.
But any final thoughts on this topic around supporting users and that and kind of the ongoing lockdown?
Yeah, well, let's say a couple of well, at least I'll on the technical side, and then I've got some thoughts on the non-technical side. But on the technical side, echoing what Karn said about VPN, obviously VPN in general has some security concerns, right? I mean, you're allowing somebody to burrow into your network from some untrusted location and potentially have unfettered access. So are you looking at those VPN logs? Have you segmented your VPN properly? Are you sanitizing those endpoints or that user account as it comes in? Do you have two-factor authentication enabled and that's scalable? I was talking with a client this week, and the mechanism they're using for two-factor on their firewall is less than desired. And so I'm not going to go into complete details of that, but it was a small number of employees that were authorized to do that. Now it's obviously a much larger number, and the way they've implemented two factors just not reasonable, scalable, best practice, all of that. But at this point, we're sort of stuck in that mode until we can make some, larger scale changes. So that's a risk that they're going to have. It's a healthcare organization. That's a risk they're going to have to document and hold on to until we can make the right changes when some of the quarantines are lifted. But it's things like that you need to be aware of, that especially in a compliance-driven industry, what's happening on the VPN? Do you have two-factor authentication that's robust and accessible to the rest of your employees? So I'd say that on the technical side. On the phishing side, that's a good recommendation. I will say we do automated phishing every month, so our employees are always on the look for those kind of things, and we have client programs as well where we can do that. That at least once a month they're getting some phishing exercise. So hopefully we're keeping them on their toes with that as well. But it's a good recommendation, even if you don't have a phishing program. Say you do, and
Right.
Your employees will start looking for it. I would say on the non-technical side, and Karn again mentioned something I'd like to piggyback off of is most organizations, including Kraft, are not designed to work entirely remotely, right? So our employees, our clients' employees, this is foreign to them. They're getting into that routine, but managers that are managing employees remotely now, that's a change. How are you engaging your employees? So my suggestion and emphasis is take care of your employees as best as possible. Figure out what your employees are needing, ask the right questions, over communicate as much as possible. Know that all of your employees they've got fears and uncertainty and all kinds of stuff going on outside of work as it relates to the health crisis, family members, getting groceries, making sure you got enough toilet paper, all those things, right? So maybe they're a little distracted. Maybe it's easier for them to miss a phishing email. I mean, all those kind of things as they're working from home. They've got, I'm surprised you haven't seen my kids running back and forth or my dogs. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on. So just know that your employees are under more stress. Take care of your employees as best as you can. That would be my final thought for you, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really wise. A lot of us, probably a lot of the audience, as well as at StratoZen, we're very focused on our customers, making sure we're taking care of them and keeping it top of mind that they're going through a lot. But it's important, even for a company like StratoZen, who's very much used to working from home, at least a lot of the employees are. It's really good reminder to make sure that you're staying, I think, over communicating, like you said, and asking right questions, making sure that you're really taking care of employees right now, because the stress builds up on them as well. So
yep,
that's a really good ad. Once again, we're out of time. I could have these kind of conversations seems like continually, so we'll definitely be doing these more and more as we go along. I think we'll probably get on a weekly schedule here for almost certainty. But Don, Karn, thanks so much. I think this was super valuable, and I'm sure our audience got a lot of value out of it. I just want to remind the audience that if you have any suggestions or questions or topics that you would like us to cover, or even if you'd like to be a panelist, absolutely send in. We'd love to hear from you, and we certainly want these to be the topics that are driven by our MSP community. So you can email me directly, eric.gravett@stratozen.com, or certainly contact us via the website and that. But again, thanks everyone for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.